Hey guys, what's up? So we're discussing the course on how to study M Laxmikanth, 5th edition for Indian Polity. And in this particular lesson, I will cover like topic wise which topics you have to study, so that chapter wise topics which you have to study, so that you know exactly what to do and so that you don't get bogged down with the book. Because many people commit that mistake and then they later realize that not everything has to be studied, and if even if you have to study everything once, then not everything has to be revised. But just before the exam, there are some topics which are more important than the others, and this realization has to happen. Now you must have read the acts which are given in this chapter in modern Indian history. For example, if you read any standard like book, you will read these chapters, so that is not an issue. And if you have not done it, then you will read it when you read the spectrum. So there is a difference between spectrum and polity. For spectrum is basically from a history angle, they are not doing it from a polity angle, but this book is from a polity angle. Okay, so regulating act of 1773. So many first happened with this act, like first governor general, supreme court came in Bengal, etc. So these things are important, you need to know such stuff. And Pitt's India Act 1784 basic provisions, and try to compare its provisions with those of the 1773 act, so that you will know what we are talking about. Then you have Charter Act of 1833. So this becomes important. First three features are especially important. Then you have Charter Act of 1853. So as you can see, it is coming every 20 years. Then it is the last of the Charter Act, and it features of this 1, 2 and 4 are important. So if you read the book, you will realize what do you mean by this 1, 2 and 4. Then Government of India Act 1858, it was done in the wake of the 1857 revolt. Everybody knows about this, and if you read the book, you will further reinforce this. So therefore it is very very important, like Crown took this sovereignty over the India, and try to memorize its features like post of Viceroy and Secretary of State, ending the dual government, 15-member Council of India, and so on. There are a lot of features in the historical background. Then you have Indian Councils Act of 1861, 1892 and 1909. So focus more on 1861 and 1909, especially 1909, like all the provisions are very very important, and especially it talks about Morley-Minto reforms, and it also talks about separate electorate. So this was done in 1909. So try to read about everything about this. Montagu-Chelmsford reforms introduced diarchy, and Government of India Act of 1919. So focus on the provisions of diarchy, bicameralism, that is the two-house system, direct elections, limited franchisee, central public sector commission, etc. So that is your Montagu-Chelmsford reforms. Then there is a recommendation of Simon Commission, that is also there. Then all these are important. Then Government of India Act of 1985. So it is the second landmark act after 1861 Act. It focus on federation, provincial autonomy, diarchy is given at center, bicameralism in provinces, Federal Public Service Commission, which later on became UPSC, RBI, Federal Court, etc. So all these are the important points in this. Then you have India Independence Act of 1947. So just go through the provisions of India Independence Act of 1947 and try to get an idea about what it is. Then it is not much important compared to 1985 and 1919 acts. 1985 is important because majority of the constitution is derived from the Government of India Act of 1935. Then making of the constitution, you can talk about composition of constituent assembly under the cabinet vision plan, manner of election or nomination of members, changes made by the Indian Independence Act of 1947, enforcement of the constitution, that is what is the difference between 26 November and 26 January, focus on provisions which came in effect on 26 November 1949, then criticism of the constituent assembly. And if you are studying like exam for SSC etc and other MCQ type exams, you can memorize the names of the chairman of various committees of constituent assembly. By the way, you can check out plus.unacademy.com for live classes by me and other educators, and important facts given at the end of the chapter, and speed read rest of the chapter. So these points are important. And salient feature of the constitution, it is so important, I can't tell the more emphasis. Read word by word, very very important chapter, not because questions will be asked from it, that is separate, but it will form the base of your polity. So read it very very carefully. Factors that contributed to the elephantine size of our constitution, why it is so big, why it is one of the largest written constitution of the entire world, sources of various parts of Indian constitution. So you can better memorize the table given at the end of the chapter, that is table 3.4, because it is asked, yeah, like concurrent list is taken from which constitution, fundamental rights is taken from which constitution, etc. Then rigidity and flexibility in the amendment of the constitution. So you will read later the types of majorities, so you don't have to read it now. Then features of a federation and unitary system of government. So unitary system is let us say United Kingdom, federal is basically USA, India is somewhere in between. Features of parliamentary form of government, which is again like UK. If you want to have presidential form of government, that is like US. So difference between due process of law, procedure established by law, provisions which make judiciary independent, 6 fundamental rights, basics of DPSP and fundamental duties, provisions of constitution which reveal the secular nature of the Indian state, Western versus Indian state of secularism, concept of secularism, list of independent bodies, provisions to make them independent, basics of emergency provisions. And table 3.1 to 3.4 are very important, and if you want to memorize various parts, schedules and important articles, you can do it from these tables. Then basics of 97th Constitutional Amendment Act, which includes the cooperative society. Now criticism of the constitution is very important, and when you start writing mock test for mains, this is one of the first questions which will come. Then preamble, to memorize the text of the preamble, they can directly ask you, or even if it is not directly asked, it can sometimes be asked in the interview or in prelims. They can ask which of the following word is not mentioned or mentioned. Ingredients of the preamble: learn the meanings of sovereign, secular, socialist, democratic, republic, justice, liberty, equality. Then democratic versus communistic socialism, various devices of direct and indirect democracy, meaning of social, economic, distributive and political justice, provisions for civic and political equality, etc. Then significance of the preamble, try to remember the keywords here like horoscope of constitution, soul of the constitution, keynote to the constitution, preamble as part of the constitution. So notice the observations done by Supreme Court in Berubari case, Keshwananda cases, etc. Then amendability of the preamble. So try to get introduced to the concept of basic features given by the Supreme Court in the Keshwananda Bharti case. Anyway, you will read this in detail in later chapters. Then union and its territories, difference between territory of India and Union of India, Parliament's power to reorganize the states, very important under Article 3 and 4, integration of princely states, and read the main recommendation of the Har Commission, JVP, Fazal Ali Commission, get an idea about the creation of various states, focus on northeastern states and former colonies. And then citizenship, memorize the rights and privileges available only to the citizen, 15, 16, 19, 29, 30. Categories of the person who became a citizen of India at the beginning of our constitution, 5 ways of acquiring citizenship and RNT, okay, the 3 ways of losing it. And then compare citizenship provisions of India and US, remember provisions in the constitution for positive discrimination, conferment of rights on overseas citizen of India card holder, and comparison of NRI, PIO and OCI card holder. This is very important. So thank you for watching this lesson. Hey guys, what's up? So we continue our journey with M Laxmikanth's important chapters and which topics you have to study from that. So in this particular lesson, I'll cover chapter number 7 to 11. I've already covered chapter number 1 to 6. So please watch that if you have not watched that before. So the most important chapter is, I personally, in my opinion, it is always in top 5. So it is among the top 5 most important chapters of polity. It helps you in formulation of so many basics. So this is fundamental rights. There are a lot of features of fundamental rights. So all the 12 points which are given here are very important. Focus on the applicability, suspension of fundamental rights, etc. Then see the definition of state and notice the inclusion of bodies like ONGC, private bodies, agencies which are working for state under this particular definition. And also see the meaning of law under Article 13 for this. Then table 7.1, 7.2 for list of all the fundamental rights and various fundamental rights which are available to citizens, foreigners respectively. Just remember that there are 5 fundamental rights which are not available to foreigners, rest all of them are available to foreigners. This list is 15, 16, 19, 29 and 30. They are exclusive to citizens. Then the concept of equality before law versus equal protection of laws, how does it entail? Understand both these concepts well. Okay, one is like positive, one is negative and all that. Then various aspects of rule of law, it is very important. Professor Dicey's concept, exceptions to equality is there. So very important. There are 7 exceptions to equality. So try to memorize these exceptions by heart. It will definitely pay you in the longer run. Then various exceptions to Article 15. Then criteria for creamy layer. Okay. Then Supreme Court's observation in the famous Mandal case on reservation. So Indira Sahani case and Mandal Commission and all these becomes important. Then the list of derived rights based on Supreme Court judgments under the right to freedom of speech and expression and reasonable restrictions on them. So these are the various list of derived rights. Okay. Then notice the reasonable restrictions in the exercise of 6 rights under Article 19, and these are different for different rights, and remember them and will also remember the difference. Then there are 3 provisions under Article 20: ex post facto, double jeopardy, self-incrimination. Try to notice their applicability wherever it is possible. Article 21, one of the most important fundamental rights. Obviously, everybody knows about it. It is almost always in news because of its interpretation by the Supreme Court. And read the Supreme Court's observation in Gopalan case, Menka case, etc. And keep in mind the 34 rights which are listed here under Article 21. Try to remember them as much as possible, but no need to memorize. But you should be able to weed out the wrong one among the 4 options, just in case if UPSC asks which of the following is not the interpretation. Then 86 Constitutional Amendment Act, Article 21A, right to education. All this is important. Then Article 22, that is punitive versus preventive detention, difference between the two parts under this article. No need to memorize the list of preventive detention laws which are given here. Then Article 23 and 24, read the provisions, but no need to stress much on these articles. Focus on Child Labor Amendment 2016. Read its analysis from some past newspaper editorial. Meaning of keywords under Article 25. Rights under Article 26. Difference between Article 25 and 26. Read the explanation of Article 27. Various types of institutions which are covered under Article 28. Then comes Article 29 and 30. They are exclusive to the citizens and various rights under them, cultural and educational rights. Difference between the two rights. Various institutions covered by them. Again, one of the most important articles is Article 32 in the entire constitution. It is the right to constitutional remedies. There are 5 remedies. Okay, habeas corpus, certiorari quo warranto, mandamus, and prohibition. So ideally, you should read each and every word written under this heading. Try to focus more on the various writs which can be issued by the Supreme Court. How the Article 226 contrasts with Article 32, their meaning, their applicability, etc. Then various armed forces and their fundamental rights. So here focus on and underline the power of the Parliament. Then study the table 7.3, martial law versus national emergency. So that is also important. Then declaration of martial law under Article 34, its effects on various fundamental rights. Now various exceptions to fundamental rights are also there. So try to focus on the 9th schedule, okay, Coelho case, etc. And finally end this chapter by reading the criticism and significance of fundamental rights. Then you have chapter number 8, which is Directive Principles of State Policy. Again an important chapter, because usually these fundamental rights and DPSPs, they go hand in hand. So study all the 5 features of DPSP given here, because these are very important and they can be asked in the exam. Then classification of DPSP into socialist, Gandhian, liberal intellectual principles. Understand these principles, use them in your answers. You will have to memorize them, and you will also have to memorize fundamental rights DPSP anyway, because what happens is whenever you're writing good essays or good answers, these points, when you like become blank, these points come to your rescue. New DPSPs are 42nd Amendment Act, 44th, 86th, 97th. All these have added new DPSP 86, right to education आया. So then it became from 6 to 14, it became early childhood care. From 97th, cooperative, etc. Then criticism and utility of DPSP, have a smooth read. Then there are conflicts and comparison between fundamental rights and DPSP. This is very important, because this is asked a lot. Analyze the judgments of Supreme Court in Champakan, Golaknath, Keswananda Bharti, Minerva Mills case, etc. Then implementation of DPSP. Just try to get an idea of the various important acts enacted till now and various schemes to give shapes to the various DPSPs, etc. Then fundamental duties is one of the most important chapter, but despite the fact it is the smallest, yet you will find questions from this. Each and every line has to be remembered. Every alternate year at least they ask one question. Okay, even prelims, mains, everything is covered, so do not ignore it under any cost. First of all, memorize all the 11 fundamental duties by heart. You have to like ratta, proper ratta. Then various Swansea committee recommendations, important. Then study the various features, criticism and significance of fundamental duties. Answer to any question regarding the relevant significance of fundamental duties in the current times will include the aspects which are given here. Then there is a committee called as Verma committee. It has also given its recommendations. So these days it is discussed that the list of fundamental duties should be expanded. So it should not be a wonder if you find a question on fundamental duties in mains next year in 2019, etc. Then amendment of the constitution, understand very well the procedure, underline or highlight. Bill by either minister, private member, no joint session is there. State legislature, simple majority, and in case of federal provisions you need like half of the state. Neither withholding nor written by president. These are important points. Types of majorities have been given, remember them by heart. Okay, and they can be like three types of majorities. They can often confuse in MCQs. They can ask which of the following provisions can be amended by simple majority, and there will be a federal provision in the choice. Then criticism of the amendment process, note down the main criticism in point form. Then basic structure of the constitution, emergence, Kesavananda Bharati case, Shankari Prasad Golaknath case, list of 20 basic structure, remember them by heart. Okay, it will be help you in many places, and no need to memorize table 11.1 in this case. So thank you for watching this lesson. In the next lesson we'll continue discussing beyond the chapter number 11. I hope it is helping you. Hey guys, what's up? So till now we have covered the first 11 chapter of Laxmikanth, that is the part 1 of the book. Now in this particular lesson we will cover chapter 12 to 16, that is the part 2 of this book. And part 2 is basically system of government. So it includes the parliamentary system, chapter 12. Chapter 13 is federal system. Chapter 14 is interstate relations. Chapter 15 is interstate relations. And chapter 16 is emergency provisions. So these are the part 2 or the system of the government. So chapter 12 is parliamentary system. So here we will see the features of parliamentary government. Know what do you mean difference between de jure and de facto, by law, by effect, and collective responsibility. Then features of presidential system of government, which is seen in US. So contrast the Indian parliamentary system with American presidential system. Concept of kitchen cabinet or coterie. Doctrine of separation of powers between legislative, executive and judiciary. Merits and demerits of parliamentary system, etc. But you should not criticize this because it is a part of the basic structure of the constitution. It will never be changed. Then memorize the table 12.1 because it gives beautiful summary and comparison between the parliamentary and presidential system. What are the reasons for adoption of parliamentary system in India? Many people think because Britishers had it, that's why we adopted it. Yes, that is correct, but that is not the only reason. There are other reasons as well which are stated here. Comparison between Indian and British models of parliamentary system, because despite both being parliamentary, there is a huge difference between the British model as well as the Indian model. Okay, they are not the same. There are huge differences. So here notice the doctrine of sovereignty of parliament, legal responsibility, shadow cabinet. The British parliament is much more powerful than any parliament in the entire world. And then chapter 13 deals with the federal system. Okay, so try to know the concepts of federal and unitary government. So ideal example of whenever you have to discuss a federal government, the ideal example is United States of America. And whenever you have to discuss a unitary government, ideal example is let's say UK. And examples of countries which follow these models, Switzerland is also example of a federal country, very federal country. Now table 13.1 compares these two models. So try to understand and memorize it. Now what are the historical context of federation, comparison between Indian and Canadian models of federation, because these days in mains you will find one particular section where they are asking you to compare and contrast the constitution of the two countries. Now federal feature of the constitution, so try to remember every feature which is given here. Suppose they ask you like what features can be amended by a special majority and ratification by half of the state legislatures. Any feature which is federal feature, for example all India services, like let's say GST. So these are the features which have to be amended by special majority and half of the state legislature. Let's say in 29 state legislature are there, so at least 15 has to do it, right? So you should never get trapped here. So this is an important point. Consequently, you should also know the unitary features to distinguish between these two. Then the critical evaluation part, it becomes very important for your mains exam. So here in the last paragraph, recent trends in Indian political system which shows the federal spirit have been given, and focus on these points and you can quote them in your answers as well. So it will like really help you a lot in getting a lot of marks. Then you have chapter 14 which is interstate relations. So territorial extent of central and state legislation, like focus on the cases areas where parliament's laws are not applicable. Here the role of the president and governor is important. Then threefold distribution of legislative subjects between union and concurrent and state list. No need to remember there are more than 200 items, but try to remember the main things like matter of national importance, like foreign relations, defense, nuclear power, space. All these are always in the union list, and the matters are not that important like police, education, health. These are in the state list or in the concurrent list, as the case may be. So scan the whole list given in the appendix, correlate the logic with the item of every list. Now we would just get an idea. I've given 4 choices which list and item would belong to. Try to have this basic idea. Then you have parliamentary legislation in the state field, very important, because there are 5 instances where parliament makes laws on a matter in the state list. Always remember these points. Then center's control over state legislation, focus on the role of president and the governor. Then various distribution of executive powers, obligation of states and the center. So notice the role of article 365 here, and the 6 cases where the center is entitled to give directions to the states. This is the most important thing, by the way, just remember that. Mutual delegation of functions, especially the executive functions. Then provisions to secure cooperation, coordination between the center and the states. Relations during emergencies, to just know the basics. A whole chapter is basically dedicated for it later. Then extra constitutional devices to promote cooperation and coordination between the center and the states. Just get a brief idea, no need to remember the list. Allocation of taxing powers, like focus on the restrictions on the taxing power of the states. Then distribution of tax revenues, it is very important. It is one of the major bone of contention between center and states, and read all the provisions carefully, especially what happened with the GST. Distribution of non-tax revenues, grants and aid to the states. So try to know the difference between statutory and discretionary grants. Then finance commission, it is again very important, but here read only the matters dealt by it. Later it will be explained in detail. Then protection of the state interest, try to know the provisions to protect the interest of the state in financial matters with regards to the borrowing power of the center and states. Provisions regard to the rule of immunity from mutual taxation. Now this is also important. Changes in center state financial relation during emergency, but it is given in much more detail in the emergency chapter. Then tension areas in center state relations, very important for writing answer of any question related to federal disputes. Major recommendation of ARC and Rajmannar committee, important recommendation of Sarkari and Punchi commission, and you can quote your answer whenever polity or governance question comes in GS paper 2. In conclusion or in suggestion at the end of the answer, you can quote these commissions. So practice including them in your answers. Then you have interstate relations, chapter 15. So interstate water disputes, article 262, provision of Interstate Water Dispute Act of 1956, article 363, interstate council. Understand very well the concept of full faith and credit. Read the 3 provisions which are given here. Then interstate trade and commerce, so just know the crux of article 301, 307, nothing important here. Then zonal council, it is a statutory body, its composition, member of these councils, objectives for which these councils are formed. Then you have emergency provisions, very important chapter, try to read it word by word. And grounds of declaration of national emergency, parliamentary approval, duration, revocation of proclamation, read every line. Understand very well the effects of national emergency on CSR, life of Lok Sabha, state assemblies, fundamental rights. Make a table in your notes which demarcate the distinction between 358 and 359. It is important. Then grounds of imposition of President's rule, parliamentary approval, duration, effect of President rule. And table 16.1 differentiates national emergency and President rule. So memorize that. Study the scope of judicial review, Supreme Court ruling in Bomai case. Also understand various cases of proper and improper use of President's rule, ground of declaration, parliamentary approval, duration, criticism of emergency provisions. Have 4 or 5 points in mind. Now when you revise the chapter, compare various provisions of 3 types of emergency. Financial emergency is not that important, still read it. Like type of majority required for approval and revocation. Duration is very important, every duration. In prelims you can get confused between these provisions, and although it is a general rule, it applies more for this chapter. You have to revise it a lot to get command on this chapter. So thank you for watching this lesson.